Good evening. This is the Esports Professional Network panel number 6. Today we are going to be discussing esports photographers and the very many valuable services that they provide to anyone who wants to view esports from afar or even just remember what they went through. Today I have two illustrious guests, Robert Paul and Troy Gillis, and we will bring them up here in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There they are. So, like I said, today we are going over esports photography, and their photographers can be easily overlooked. You may not even be aware of them until you have a wedding, or you're hunting for those Google pictures that you want to put on your Facebook page, your Twitter feed, or your Instagram. So these are the people. These two are two of the people that make that happen. When you want something memorialized forever and ever, and you had that picture up on your nightstand, these are the two people that take the time out of their day to go and make that a reality for you. Uh, Rob, Troy are my two guests, and if we will spend some time here getting to know them and know some of the great things that they do in our industry. Hello, Rob. Hello, Troy. Okay, say that one more time. I had to unmute. My mistake.
Good evening. How's it going?
Okay, so the first question that it's kind of a question that we go through most all of our panelists and our guests is, what is your field of expertise? What takes up the majority of your work week? And how is all that related to esports? Let's start with you, Rob.
Sure. So, obviously, my field of expertise is photography. Um, I sort of came up as a photographer in esports. I was not like a photographer before and then transitioned into esports. I was a player that picked up photography and became an esports photographer. The majority of my work week mostly involves traveling to events, editing, chasing new gigs, and just lots of that wonderful boring administrative stuff like filing paperwork and contracts and invoices and all that fun stuff. um, yeah.
Stuff that only a true believer will relish in. So.
Yeah.
Okay, and next, Troy.
My field of expertise at the moment is just working 9 to 5 while trying to pursue my esports photography career. So majority of my work week is working a typical job, and then I wouldn't say I have a history really in esports. It was I wanted to figure out a way into the esports industry, and I thought videography would be good, but to learn my camera, I started taking pictures, and then I just fell in love with that. So I've been chasing that dream.
Right on, right on. Okay, that's that's pretty great. And if you want to know more about them, on the Google document linked below in the About section, you'll find their LinkedIn and their Twitter feeds to get a more comprehensive view of their accomplishments. We'll move on right to the next question, which is uh, some I've run into some photographers who have made it a point to say that they are a photographer first, and they are interested in their career field second. So they're a wedding photographer, but they're a photographer first, and they just happen to enjoy capturing that perfect moment in the once in a lifetime event in someone's life, like a wedding. So the second question, well, really the first question of what we're talking about is, are you an esports photographer or a photographer with a career interest in esports? Troy.
I would like to claim being an esports photographer, mainly because that's where my interest lies. That's where I would like to, most of my pictures to come from and be seen. But I'm learning that I do need to shoot other subjects and different surroundings to improve that craft versus only shooting like stationary, people sitting at a computer and occasionally jumping up for celebrations to really grasp like a different perspective when I go to different events.
Okay. So without esports, would you say that you would still be quite as interested in photography as you are now?
I probably would not to
Okay,
the extent that I currently am.
fair. That's fair. And how about you, Rob?
So I would definitely call myself an esports photographer right now. But similar to what Troy was saying, I do sort of understand and acknowledge that, you really you have to be a photographer in any I think in any field of photography. You have to be a photographer first, and then sort of focus in on what it is that you want to do with that. Um, and so like when I was learning photography, I studied street photography, I studied landscape photography, I studied portrait photography, because all of these things kind of feed into each other in different ways, and it's important to kind of have that context and that breadth of knowledge regardless of what you're shooting.
Okay, so kind of build that foundation first, and then worry about the specifics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, so now that we have some of the minutia, we've laid that groundwork for the minutia. The next question is, how is a photographer in esports different than a traditional photographer, if there is a difference at all, Rob?
Well, for one, you're going in and you're shooting these multi-day events most of the time. You're shooting 3, 4, 5 day events, um, 12-hour days, 14-hour days, whatever. It can get pretty intense. So the stamina you kind of have to have is pretty significant. Even if you're shooting a wedding, like maybe Indian weddings, go over multiple days sometimes. But for the most part, any other field of photography, well, not any other field of photography, there's multiple day, advertising shoots and that kind of thing. Uh, but it's very physically intense sometimes, with just constantly being on your feet. At a 3 day event, I can spend 40 hours on my feet just shooting easily. So I think that's one of the key differences.
So is it more of you have to be ready all the time, anytime, in order to capture that moment, or is
Hmm.
there downtime? What would you say?
It depends on the game. It depends on the event. A game like Dota, you have 45-minute matches where the first 20 minutes may or may not have anything terribly interesting happening. Um, on the other
Right.
hand, you have events like Evo fighting games where you have just hundreds and hundreds of matches happening at the same time at any given moment. And you have to be cognizant of where all these different matches and brackets and pools are. Um, so
So,
yeah, it varies.
so the level of activity very much depends on how much active you are. Then awesome. How about you, Troy?
To kind of bounce off like what Rob was saying, you definitely need to know like things like where matches are taking place, especially if who you're shooting for is looking for storylines with certain players. You need to make sure you're getting those shots, but at the same time, with like traditional photography versus what I've noticed with esports is being aware of your surroundings. Usually in a setting, I know like for weddings or if you're shooting portraits, you have one individual subject. You you don't need to worry as much about your surroundings because people know you're there and that you're shooting, so they try not to get in the way of your shot. Where versus esports is people are everywhere. There's camera equipment everywhere. You have things that can break the stream, so you have to be really cautious of where you're shooting, um, as well as trying to get the shot that you want without disturbing the equipment or like pushing people within the crowd, kind of out of the way to get your shot. So for me, the difference is from traditional photography versus esports is just being really, really cautious and aware of your surroundings. Um, and I think I'm just starting to notice that now that I've started branching out and doing other photography gigs. Esports is very like self-cautious and like you have to be aware of where stuff is when shooting.
You know, sometimes you just want to barrel right through the crowd in order to get that shot you see.
Most definitely, most definitely.
So you mentioned something interesting, storylines. What are those? What's the significance of that?
Storylines, it's like team rivalries, player rivalries. Even it doesn't even have to be necessarily a rivalry. It could just be like friends, who play often and they just have good matches and people want to see that. And I know that some organizations or teams, they really like to have footage or photos of those rivalries together. So like they can when when the next time they have a match, they have something to kind of like present to people that'll get them interested and hyped up for those storylines. Like kind of like K Brad and Knuckle do this past weekend at SoCal Regionals. They have a rivalry. So having pictures of them together playing and one of them getting hyped when they beat each other is just, it tells a story that most people probably wouldn't know, or that if it's their first time watching Street Fighter, they might, through a photo, they might be able to tell, this was an intense match because, this other guy may be really disappointed in the photo and the other guy's really happy. So it's just something you kind of have to pay attention to and be really in tune with when shooting, is kind of knowing players' backgrounds as well as um, how they interact with other people within the community.
Okay. I definitely want to touch on storylines between the two of you here if we have time at the end, because that sounds sounds like something. There's so much more there, like the tip of the iceberg that we could talk about. So the next question is, what does success look like for an esports photographer, Rob?
Sorry, just
Oh, it's all
taking
good.
note of something there. What does success look like for an esports photographer? It depends, I think, on the person, where they are in their sort of journey, so to speak. Some people, might just want to, success to them might just be going and making it to an event to cover it. For other people, success might be, quitting their job and going full time. That's something I did at the start of this year. It comes in a lot of ways. It comes in milestones. Back in 2014, I got to shoot Evo. That was a success. That was a huge success. To be able to be brought in for an event like that.
So what would you say for you? What would you have to do? What would you have to accomplish in order for you to look back and say, absolutely, that was 100% success for me?
I think I'm mostly there. To be completely honest, I feel like I'm there. Obviously there's always growth. There's always experience. There's always ways to improve what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, the work that I'm doing. But as far as getting to where I've wanted to be, I've mostly done that.
So you say mostly. Is there something left for you?
Sure. And a lot of it is just, specific events, sort of bucket list events for me, like the international, like Worlds, like I Am Katowice, stuff like that I would just really love to get out and do.
That just rolled off the tip of your tongue. I Am Katowice.
Yeah.
Hey
Spent
Troy,
a lot of time
how
thinking
how
about
about you? What does success look like for an esports photographer?
For me, I would say a definite success definitely looks like Rob's position, especially up and coming. Uh, you know, Following him and seeing his work is just like, you see how many events he goes to, and you're like, okay, I wish I had that flow of work. But when you're up and coming, you're paying out of pocket to go to events. So I've started to come to terms with, okay, I have to work toward, getting to that top level, being in what I call like the top 5 list of, esports photographers. So like for me, my success comes from not only making it to an event financially, but seeing my outcome of pictures and then posting them up and seeing how people respond to them. Even if it's just like, 3 or 4 people retweeting them or just saying like, oh, wow, I didn't know someone's taking a picture of me here. This looks great. That is a good feeling. And I consider that my personal success while still growing and trying to reach, I guess, this is me fanboying a little bit, but Rob's status of, what I consider like a top tier esports photographer.
So when you say Rob status, tell me, is that covering Evo? Is that covering a specific event? Is that just reaching some sort of threshold? What does that mean?
For me, it's like being one of the go-to photographers. Like if someone knows they have an event coming up and they're like, okay, we need photo coverage, who are we gonna go to? And they pull out a list. Rob's name is probably gonna be on that, more than likely number one at that list, and then they're gonna have other people. But being on that go-to list of esports photographers, who can we contact that can cover our event?
Being on the short list that they that they pull up. Got it. That's a good goal to have. Awesome. So we will move on. Actually, Clean Volts had a question that I definitely wanted to touch on before we transition into our next phase. Is it may be cliche, but what has been the best event you've been able to capture, Troy?
For me, it would have to be DreamHack Austin.
I'm sorry. What
Not
did
only
you say? GPEC Austin?
DreamHack
Oh,
Austin.
DreamHack. Okay.
One, because it was the first time that DreamHack was in the United States. Two, it was actually the first time I got to introduce myself to Rob. Three, the photos came out amazing, and for the environment of Austin and just the vibe of the city was just a phenomenal event. I enjoyed that. That was definitely my favorite event that I've shot thus far.
Got it. All right, Rob.
Probably this is always a hard one to pick, but I think Genesis 3 is up there among one of my top favorites. That was a Smash event that happened at the beginning of this year, and it was as far as I know, the first time that a fighting game event has had its finals day in a theater, as opposed to the standard sort of ballroom or convention hall style. And it was amazing to see, people in there going bonkers for Smash 64 in this amphitheater stage. Like it was kind of surreal, and that it's really a standout event.
So just the magnitude of the event made it all worth the while.
Yeah, and it's not it's certainly not the biggest event out there. It's not the biggest event that I've ever shot, but seeing the growth of that scene and the growth of the fighting game events, really made that a standout event.
All right. Very nice. Thank you, Clean Volts, for the question, which funnels into our next question here. Is it difficult for a photographer to become a photographer for the big names, the big events, and the teams? What would you say about that, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. It depends a lot on who you know. It really does.
Right.
And it's one of those things. That's kind of part of the base you have to build and the ground you have to cover when you're starting out and when you're sort of building up your experience. Is also building up your contacts and connections and your friend network. I mentioned I shot Evo in 2014. I had reached out to Evo about covering it, and they shot me down. And it wasn't until someone put in a good word for me that I was later brought on. I shot the MLG CS:GO major, and I had reached out to them, and trying to get it. And it wasn't until someone internally, again, put in a good word for me and helped make that happen. So it's really, really important to have connections and you have to be able to back those connections up with good work. But simply having good work and simply doing good work, unfortunately, is not always enough to bring in more work.
So how does a photographer get to know who they need to know? The golden question, I'm sure,
yeah,
but you've
yeah.
been there and you've done it, so
Mm-hmm.
you would probably be a great person.
A lot of the people I met was through meeting other photographers. It was through having a social media presence. The person who put in a good word for me at MLG was someone I barely even knew, but they knew my work and they knew that I was interested, and so they helped make that happen. Getting out, meeting other photographers, and just talking to them about the work they're doing, and having a good rapport with them, because not everybody can cover an event. Like, I have a list of people that I go to if I get asked to shoot an event but can't shoot it. I have my own short list of photographers. And people have done the same for me. They can't shoot an event, they pass it on to me. That same kind of idea.
Nice. It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, you still gotta, like I said, you gotta be able to back it up, but who you know is definitely part of getting there.
All right, Troy, what is do you think it's difficult and you're currently developing?
Yeah. Most definitely. I think with one thing that I've gone through the most is reaching out to orgs teams and being, shot down just because I don't have a good word in, I guess you could say, with the organization. But I've also noticed when I reach out to an org and I let them know, hey, I'm covering this event. Do you have photo coverage? Most of the time I'll get shot down, but I notice that they will have one of their reporters go, and you can kind of tell, not to knock any of them and say they don't have, photography experience or they don't know what they're doing, but you can kind of, they will be taking pictures on their phone and like tweeting it out, and it's kind of like upsetting just because you're like, okay, you could have a professional looking image versus someone who just took it on their phone. um, so I think it's some orgs not truly understanding the power behind a good photo, um, which makes it really difficult to get brought on by a team or organization. It's just maybe not a full understanding or appreciation for what a photographer has to go through to get the images that they get.
So, what would you say is something that an organization could do, then being on the other end of your request, to understand what it takes and what it means to have a professional photographer?
Um, I guess just like researching, looking at people's, like Rob said, looking at their work to even see if it's good. Um, and and then at that point also, reaching out to their who they're sending to the event to kind of see where their standards are, checking the standards of their reporters' images so
Okay.
that it looks well with whatever they're reporting or covering. So that way, you don't have an amazing article and horrible imagery, or vice versa. A great image with a horrible article. It's just, I think they, because of the underappreciation that they have, or not full understanding, is just not looking into people's work and, you know uh, kind of talking and saying, hey, would it be worth it to reach out to this person to have them cover the event for us?
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
I think part of that is also on the photographer to really demonstrate value, and to be able to say like, look, this is how photography brings you value. It brings you value in better looking content. It brings you value in more engagement on social media. It brings you value in having, images that you can show potential sponsors. Uh, a proper like professional photo of the crowd at your event is going to look better in a sponsorship deck than your like iPhone panorama from like the side of the room. Those kind of things. It's photography is one of those things that doesn't necessarily have a like calculable ROI, and so it
That's
becomes
fair.
really really hard to push the value of that. Um, some people get it. Some people understand, the value of having the archive imagery, um, and to other people, it's just like, it's they think all they need is some images for a few tweets for their event. And in some cases, that's true. Some events just don't. Maybe they're not in a place where they want or need that yet. Um, but that's part. Again, demonstrating value and being able to go to them and saying, this is what you can do with what I do, and really get yourself in there.
So, have you ever been in a situation where you're conversing with someone who clearly does not appreciate or have an appreciation for the expertise that you can provide them with photography, and then you went about showing them how they can? What's something that you did in order to make that happen?
I've never. It's a lot of the conversations that I've had start sort of at a middle ground where,
Okay.
they know that there should have photo coverage, but they're not necessarily leveraging it in the best ways possible. They may not have an Instagram, they may not be pushing photos out on Twitter, they may not be using them in like their web promotions or website designs or stuff like that. Um, and that's kind of
Okay.
a bigger part of the conversations that I've had of saying, hey, you can still use it here, you can still use it there, you can still do all these other things with the images. and not just stick them in a gallery on Flickr or your Facebook page or whatever.
All right, take note. Take note. So let's go on to our next question, which is how do you prioritize the events that are available to attend for you to attend, Troy?
For me, being it all out of pocket, I just kind of pick, what event I feel like I would enjoy the most. Which is also to say like what event I can actually afford, to save up toward.
Okay.
Right now, my savings are going to be going toward most of the dream hacks this year, just to get out there and try to shoot those events. Um, but it's just for me, it's just I just prioritize it on what I really want to cover or what events or games I don't have in my um, I guess what would you call it, like your photography album. Like I don't what
Okay.
games that I don't have there, I'll prioritize it that way as well. But most of the time, it's just what I can afford to go to.
So when you have all these events, Evo, the international, the Smash events that you could potentially save up to, and you mentioned you wanted to go save up for the DreamHack. How did you come to say DreamHack is what I want to save up for versus the international?
Um, Mainly because I've started to notice that with the growth of esports and the venues that they're having, it's they're starting to have a lot more security, so it makes someone who doesn't have a press pass extremely difficult to get up
Okay.
um, to kind of where you need to be. And I don't know if Rob had to go through this, but I've noticed that with coming up and being an esports photographer, you kind of got to push your way around and go in places you're not supposed to go to get images that you really
Straight
want
up
or need.
Watergate right there.
Yep. Yep.
And the fact that the venues are growing, that it does make it a lot more difficult to kind of do that. Like you can, it's still possible, but it's a lot more difficult. So kind of knowing what events you can maneuver and push your way around, that's another way of prioritizing it. Just knowing you're not going to get arrested or kicked out of the event for trying to pursue your hobby or career or passion.
Yeah, and that's
Oh, that's
just
awesome.
to sort of expand on what Troy was saying there a little bit. For people who are a lot of people think when they're starting out that they have to shoot like worlds and they have to shoot the international and they have to go to like all these giant events. Like if you're just starting out and you're still like building out that core of your portfolio, find some local, regional, like mid-sized event that you can just go to and get some good shots at. Um, it's going to be easier for you. The event is going to appreciate it more. You're not competing with like venue security necessarily. um, it's there's a lot of value there for people who are just starting out versus trying to sort of develop yourself at a massive event.
Start
um,
building from block one.
Yeah. But as far as prioritizing events that I'm available for,
Mm-hmm.
I love this question because it's a tough one to answer. Uh, I keep a calendar of like anytime I hear about an event announcement, I put it on my calendar, whether I think I might go there or not. I just put it on my calendar. I have 17 events on my calendar for October. Um, and so many of these organizations and events, they announce like 2 months out, 3 months out. It's a week before the event and you don't have signed contracts with these organizations yet. uh, so much stuff in esports is still happening last second, and it becomes very, very hard to prioritize and just the logistics of getting around to these events. um, so a lot of the times it comes down to whoever gets to me first. um, if there's 3 events on a weekend and the first one to get back to me and say, hey, yeah, we want you to shoot it, that's going to be the one. And it's unfortunate because sometimes
Mm-hmm.
there's other events. There might be this other event that I really, really want to shoot, but if the second option gets to me first, I gotta do the work.
Mm-hmm. What's the expression? With the early bird gets the worm. You just gotta be
Yeah.
on the ball sometimes.
Yeah. It's getting better and better, slowly.
Yeah, as we become quote unquote more professional as an
Yeah.
industry, then you start seeing those more professional qualities such as punctuality, uh, the the really well dressed businessman and woman with the contracts and very rigid dates. Yeah, I absolutely see what you're saying. All right, that was awesome, by the way. Thank you both for those answers. So the next question we have is, how does your perspective provide a unique view of things as they unfold at the event? So photographers, like I mentioned in the beginning, they sometimes you don't even notice them. You don't notice them until you need them. And in some cases it may be too late. But as an outside observer, you may be a whole lot more privy. That might be the wrong word, but you might be a whole lot more. What's the word I'm looking for? You can see things that someone else may not, who's staring at the screen for an hour and a half watching Dende kick some giant butt as he mid lanes or off lanes. So, Rob, what would you say are some things that you notice that maybe is very unique to what you do?
It's a lot. You know, I spend a lot of time watching the crowd when I'm shooting, um, which is something nobody's doing. You know, you might have a crowd cam, on the video side. You might have video teams out there getting like crowd reaction shots, but yeah, I spend a lot of time just sitting on the stage watching the crowd. On this being on the stage, being in these players' faces. Um, you're catching those little interactions between teammates between rounds that aren't necessarily going up on the stream, or maybe if you're in a big venue you may not even be able to see the players on the stage. Just the fist bumps, just like the getting hype at the end of a round. um, and those little things are really great to capture because it puts a much more human element on what's otherwise seen as just like this feed of gameplay, round after round after round, with only occasional cuts to players. um, so it's about you know constantly capturing that human element, because nothing that I'm doing involves capturing gameplay. You have the stream, you have all that. This is you're purely focusing on like the human element.
Yeah, I'm starting to. So, Troy, like you were saying earlier, the capture the storyline.
Yeah.
The more I see more and more connections to this phrase that you're talking about, which I'm sure, Rob, you have either another word for, or you're intimately familiar with. So the more we talk about it, the I'm very interested in, as we get through these questions. I'm just gonna burn all the time we have left and just talk about these storylines because it just seems like a monumental subject that that even if you're not an aficionado like the two of you are, that's something that others could appreciate. So Troy, how did your perspective? What's some unique things that you see?
Um, I would say like the getting the unique vision that I've started to have with my photography has come from opening up and trying to talk to people within the community, and like I said, learning those storylines, who knows who, player backgrounds, also talking to fans. Like Rob was saying, you don't see most crowd reactions on stream. So when you're able to capture those moments and send it out over the web and people are able to see it, you can start to see that people are actually passionate about the game, and it's not all about the players or all about the casters. I do, and I also take the time out to get shots of casters because even though they are, I guess, sometimes more glorified than the actual players themselves, them interacting with the crowd, you getting a shot with them interacting with the crowd is a lot more. It has that human element that they're not just a robot who's studied the game for 12 hours and now they got to go cast for another 8 hours. Showing that they're personable and that they can actually talk to the fans, also the players. Like Rob said, it's just adding that human element to something that is not a constant feed from the Twitch stream or Hitbox stream. um, Showing people what they're not shown when they can't make it to the event, in a
Gotcha.
sense.
Okay. Yeah, the immersion
Yeah.
of it all. So our next question is: do you only choose one team, one event, one theme to stick with, or do you move around different parts? Rob.
So all of my work, uh, so far has been for like the event organizers themselves. So in general, I'm covering the entire event. Um, if I'm sticking with a team, it's as part of a storyline. You know, if if uh, if a team or a player is making a run through the losers bracket, and I need to be there to get those moments and to document that, you know, then maybe I'm sticking with them. But for the most part, it's just sort of constantly evaluating like the state of the event, so to speak, and figuring out, you know, where the best place to be is.
Mainly sticking with the event as a whole, and then sometimes you'll go down a rabbit hole when you see something really really shiny.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. How about you, Troy?
Um, for where I would say where I'm at right now, I don't necessarily prioritize a team or a team or a certain part unless it's like the grand finals or the semifinals or losers finals. But for me, it's still trying to practice and get better, knowing where to be at the right time, um, kind of knowing who to shoot. I've started to understand, especially with StarCraft, shooting StarCraft, is not all players react to wins or losses. Sometimes they're very neutral
Mm-hmm.
and they'll just get up and walk away from their computer or their station. So kind of learning, people's emotions and who's going to react to what, and will give you a good shot. Um, but even shooting for Psystorm, they don't limit me to say, hey, you can't shoot other people. um, they allow me to cover the event as a whole. Like I do make sure to get images, of our players, but they still allow me to cover the event as a whole because where I'm at with the organization is they're also helping me grow um, through by allowing me to have that freedom with my photography.
Okay. Awesome.
I don't know if you've had to go through that though, Rob, like witnessing someone not react when
Oh my
when
God, all the time. So many times I've set up for a reaction shot, and then the moment comes, and they're just like, "That was cool."
So what do you do? So I'd like to hear from each of you. Troy, what do you do when you had that StarCraft player who just got brutally smashed and all you see is
Uh, usually I'll still try to take a shot just because sometimes they don't realize that they don't react as much as they thought. Like their facial expression shows no reaction, but when they actually see the image, they're like, "Oh wow." Like hearing them say like, "Oh wow, I was pretty, disappointed in myself in the way I played,"
okay.
or "This is how I felt during this image," is completely different than what's going through my head when it's just like they either get up and walk off or they just kind of sit there for a second, but like their face is really neutral. Um,
Huh.
so sometimes it's not an instant like you'll kind of like, oh well, I thought he was gonna do more, but I've sometimes taken those pictures and kind of shown it to the person, and they're like, oh, this is what was going through my head. So it's also helped me having people not react, but also having that photo has helped me bridge a connection between people and like giving me an opportunity to talk to them.
What about you, Rob?
Um, I'm sorry. Are we answering this highlighted question or?
The so when you get that person who becomes a
Yeah.
stoic almost, how do you handle that?
Um, it depends on the moment, really. Um, a lot of the times I'll just chalk it up to a loss because
Oh, like
you
a
know,
sunk
it's
cost.
yeah, basically,
Okay,
it's a gamble that I lost, so to speak.
got it.
Um, uh, and I think it's interesting to hear Troy's take on it. To still use that as a way to still sort of contextualize what was happening, with the player. Um, but as far as that image as a photo that I would display, I don't know. It's tough because a viewer is not necessarily going to have that context.
Gotcha. Okay. So you may know, but does
Right.
that mean that you attempt to do you attempt to recover from that? Do you automatically switch to something else and try and find a filler? Or how do you handle that normally?
It's it's just kind of what it is.
Okay. Fair. Fair.
You know, or you maybe get them, shaking hands with the other player, or some other, get them walking off the stage, some other just sort of moment that maybe you know describes the moment without
Gotcha.
necessarily being purely a reaction photo.
How about that? Two very, very distinct takes, but they both make sense. So the next thing that call it the $1 million question. What are things that photographers do that most people either do not know about or do you think appreciate? Troy.
I'm gonna go back to my answer of being aware of your surroundings, um, mainly because some, like, I understand that orgs have to prioritize their stream. So I think with that is some orgs don't realize, they don't appreciate or set up a certain way, and they don't realize what a photographer has to go through to get the shots that they need to get, because sometimes there is equipment in the way, or there's someone who's operating the stream that's in the way. So kind of like when they see you standing somewhere, they're like, hey, are you supposed to be here? Or hey, you need to move. It's kind of like, you guys brought me here to, shoot this and cover it, but now you're like, I think it's them not communicating to all the tournament staff, like, hey, we have photographers, there might be a guy with a camera standing here, or doing this. So it comes back to just that awareness, and kind of, like I said, pushing your way into places you need to be to get the shot that you want. And I think that the amount of effort you have to do that is what goes underappreciated. Not necessarily always the images, but the behind the scenes work of how having to maneuver the actual event.
It's almost like yeah. Just step aside for a second there.
Yeah.
Let the. That's really. I mean, that's not. I'm sure that's not funny to you in the moment, but that's just.
I mean, I've definitely had times where I've had like a tournament staff, or even the guy who's operating the stream, attempt or ask me to leave the stage just because either they thought I was in the shot, or there was another photographer that ran past and they just saw someone with a camera, so they're like, hey, you can't be up here.
Almost like you
it's
were
not.
a fanboy or just
Yeah, and
normal.
that's what
Okay.
makes it difficult, is especially for me as someone trying to decipher myself from being a fanboy versus actually trying to pursue this as a career. Um, just because someone may see a certain equipment, or they just see a person with the camera, so they don't know what your intentions are always.
What about you, Rob?
Yeah, I've lost more shots than I've liked to admit after being told to clear a stage for a jib shot. But I think something that may be lesser known or less appreciated is having knowledge of the games. Like I've played almost every major esports title, because I think it's important to have that knowledge to cover the games, whether it's Dota, CS:GO, League of Legends, Smash, Street Fighter. I'm not particularly good at any of them, but you kind of need to be able to understand at least kind of the state of the game. Like I couldn't tell you half the things that are going on in like a Dota match, but I can tell you who's ahead, and I can tell you like kind of where in the match we are, and kind of like what the state of the game is. Whether I should, and that that helps me decide where I should be and what I should be doing.
Okay.
Should I be looking for crowd reaction shots? Should I be looking for player reaction shots? Do I have time to go up into the rafters and get like a big venue shot? It's Street Fighter. Understanding comeback mechanics, and understanding even just the round and the match structure. To know, do I need to focus on the players? Do I need to focus on the crowd? Do I need to focus on a specific player? Just having that understanding, I think really helps you be in the right place at the right time, and that's really what you should be going for.
So the amount of time and effort you put into understanding what you're photographing, not just simply taking a picture.
Right.
Yeah, like you
'Cause
said, you know who's not standing anymore.
Right.
How much time have you put into some of these games?
Not a whole, like I have like maybe 60 hours in Dota. You know, again,
Right.
it's just enough to sort of understand the game.
Okay.
You know, I never got very far into League of Legends. Um, a lot of my Counter Strike experience just comes from just playing random 5v5s. You know, again, it's not, you know, you don't have to be proficient in the games, but you need to understand the flow of the game, and you have to understand the state of the game. You know, you have to be able to look at the screen and understand, okay, this team's winning, this team's losing. Because if you don't, like, if you can't parse that out of the situation, you're like literally shooting in the dark.
Yeah, you may miss something important that you didn't know. Whereas otherwise, you know that this team just got wiped out. You can look at that team and start snapping if you need to.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay.
I've
Very
never
very
looked at
cool.
it from that perspective entirely either, because now that Rob has brought that up, like it also helps with being able to understand the game helps with timing and allowing you to put yourself in a position where I've done this before at DreamHack, where um, I was able to read the game to understand, like, it was about to end and the outcome. So I put myself in a position to take pictures of the players, but something happened where I think someone got on stage and like they were in the way. So I positioned myself to where I could instantly turn around and take crowd reaction shots versus the players, because what I had set up in my head from the understanding of the game didn't work out. So I had to pan very quickly and get the timing of, a crowd reaction, because a factor changed on the spot. So it's like understanding the game also helps you with your timing and positioning when you're actually at these events and you're shooting them.
Sounds really really complicated. I'm glad that the two of you enjoy doing it because I don't have that amount of courage.
Yeah, and it's you know, perfect example was at Evo, and there were a lot of sort of like traditional media photographers there who didn't know the games and were asking me about players and about matches and about like where they were even supposed to be. Um, and it's, you know, you don't realize how important your knowledge becomes until you kind of see the other side of that. You know, to see people who've kind of walked into this thing and they're just like, what is this? Like, what's happening in front of me?
That's a little bit of tidbit I didn't even know I wanted to know. That's really cool. So some of the more mainstream who covers everything, they're probably used to covering natural disasters and all sorts
Right,
of events, and they come into this thing where they're looking at that two video game screens. Where do you
right.
stand in the middle? Do you stand on the side? Do you
Yeah.
stand right next to the dude?
And they're
It's
tasked with capturing these very specific things like specific players and specific matches and you know, when they have no idea like what the hell is a hungry box. Like, you know,
hmm,
it's interesting.
that's very interesting. So what can the average user? I put user. What I really meant was user, organization, viewer do to support an esports photographer.
I think
Oh right, Rob.
I think for like an average person, and this really goes for any kind of content creator, just share their work. You know, even if it's just a retweet, just retweet it. You know, tell them you like it if you see it and you like it. Um, you know, especially like for someone who's just starting out, a retweet can mean being exposed to 100 more people than they would normally be exposed to, and maybe that means one new follower. Um, you know, but uh, you know, or you know, maybe someone had a rough weekend and you're like, oh my god, I love these photos, and all of a sudden it, you know, kind of turns things around a little bit.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe they got arrested while they were in a place they weren't supposed to be.
yeah, but
And that
just you
retweet
know,
was worth everything.
yeah. If you're just, you know, if you're just a viewer, if you like someone's work, whether it's written work, whether it's photography, video, drawings, whatever, just share their work.
Share their work. Troy,
Yeah,
what would you say?
I would say that's the best thing to do, is exactly what Rob said, is sharing the work, is knowing that someone else appreciated what you did and them showing it to other people that may not know who you are is a good feeling. I know when I get one or two retweets on when I post a photo up, it's a good feeling, and it can make or break my day sometimes. Because sometimes I know when I cover an event and I feel like even though it may not have been the best event, I still feel like my images may have came out amazing. But yeah, just sharing the work is the best way to do it. Unless someone's just sitting around and they want to throw a bunch of money at us esports photographers, that'd be amazing too. But sharing the content is the best.
Yeah, Clean Volts had a question, and thank you for reposting it. Was staying freelance versus becoming a full time photographer specific to a team or organization? What would you say is your viewpoint on that? On that, Troy.
Uh, I can't really. I'm not 100% sure, just because the freelance stuff that I've done, or I guess you can't really call it freelances. I didn't get paid for it, so it was kind of my own thing. But doing that and having the freedoms to shoot what I want, because I know when most people are at an org, it's certain players or certain when they're playing against certain teams or things like that you have to cover.
Mm-hmm.
So I like having that freedom of kind of shooting with what I want, and I don't want to say when you're with an org or a team you're limited, but you definitely have what your standards to be, and it can make it difficult to get some shots that you actually want. Um,
Okay.
because you may have to be somewhere else, and it may cause you to miss something that
Gotcha.
passionately wise you want to shoot, but you can't because you need to make sure that you're actually getting your work done for your org or team.
What do you think, Rob?
So I've never actually worked directly with a team, so it's hard for me to speak to that difference. All my work has always been for uh, event organizers and news outlets and that kind of thing.
And why is that?
It's just kind of that's just kind of what I've pursued. I know a lot of people try to work directly with teams, but I always kind of I don't know. I just kind of always went, for the actual events themselves.
Is it important to you to cover whatever it is you can and whatever it is you
Mm-hmm.
feel the flow is currently directing you to do versus someone saying you're obligated to cover us?
Yeah. Yeah, actually well, okay. So I went to a Smash event called Get on My Level in Canada for Red Bull, and I was tasked particularly with following around Leffen because that was
Okay.
one of his first North American events in a while.
Gotcha.
And yeah, it's there is a certain restriction there that you kind of feel leashed to a certain player, regardless of whether they're playing like a random pool match, and you're just sitting there like, okay, just kind of waiting for it to be over. Um, and when you
Okay.
could be shooting other stuff. But there's merit to all of it because the teams want photos of their players. They want guaranteed coverage of their players, and as a general event shooter, I can't always necessarily do that. Like I've had tons of orgs and players and sponsors and stuff come to me after an event and say, hey, do you have photos of such and such player or such and such moment? And I don't. And it's just, I can only be in one place at a time, or I missed it, or I was doing uploads or whatever. And you sometimes you just can't make everybody happy.
Yeah. Can't please everyone.
To
So the
add
next
on that,
the last
oh,
thing I
really
want.
quick.
I'm sorry, Troy. Would you want to say something?
Yeah. So with Rob was saying like how he was shooting for Red Bull and he had to follow a player around. I don't think some orgs or even some people understand that these players are still human, so they have emotions and they react a certain way. So them being followed sometimes is not always the best after
Oh.
losses, and you know, some of these guys are kind of like I won't say sheltered off, but they like to keep to themselves. So you being in front of their face with the camera can cause them to react, harshly toward you.
Hmm?
Um, and sometimes they don't understand that, but and it's not always hard feelings, but it's just kind of knowing this person is feeling this way, and you don't want to be right in their face with the camera after they may have had a hard loss. So it's when you're shooting for an org, it's also knowing kind of how to deal with the players and when you can deal with them, because sometimes they don't mind it when when they have an upsetting loss, but sometimes they take it to heart, and it's like, I kind of just need my moment. And
Gotcha.
I think I noticed that when I was watching something about the EG players, and they actually kicked like three of the videographer guys out of the room after a Dota loss. Like they like the players are just upset. So it's knowing how to read body language and read the people and their emotions.
So being very much in tune with your surroundings, just like the organizers, people
Yeah,
being in tune with your surroundings,
yeah,
with you being in their surrounding. I mean,
yeah.
so the last thing I wanted to go over was I want to go rewind back to storylines. The, you all, I kept hearing the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg, and then I see that there's so much more underneath that. So we don't have to spend a huge amount of time because we're almost at an hour, and thank you very much for being here for that. I wanted to definitely explore that. So Troy, you mentioned that how do you tell a story with pictures? Is it only pictures? And Rob, you were talking about those fist bumps that happen behind the scenes, and that you watching the crowd as much as they're watching the event. So Troy, do you only tell a storyline with a picture? Is that what you use to tell a storyline?
I would say mostly. Um, Sometimes I have like video stuff that helps, but mostly like photos. And sometimes it could be watching a player go through pools and then playing their rival, and then both of those players make it out of the pool, and then watching them play in the semifinals, and the person that may have lost to them in pools, they may react a certain way to their rival on stage. So kind of like how Rob was saying, like knowing, where things are occurring and who's playing. Just it's really about knowing the player's background, who they may hate playing, who they may love playing against, and sometimes it's also the newcomers. Like who is this person that's playing, and they've already knocked out three of the top players. It's really like you have to study um, the environment before going in, and I think that's how the storylines are created. So
Is it
outside of the photography, it's studying the environment through watching the tournaments and things that the orgs release for their players.
is it like a picture book where you would show that you would snap that picture of them playing pool, and then maybe later on you'd snap that picture of them walking up the stage, and then the effect afterward? Is it kind of like a progression of here, then there, then this is what it ended up with?
Yeah, most of the time, that's kind of I go for that basic storyline of are they playing in pools? Yes or no? Take a picture. Maybe even get a shot of them talking to each other about while they're watching another match, and sometimes they're talking about you know how they can play against a certain character, or even asking how do I play against this person. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there's interactions, small interactions between um, their matches that people don't notice because they only see it on stream.
Got it. Okay. Rob, storylines. How's that
Hmm.
significant to you?
Um, they're sort of stories within the story of the event. Um, sometimes your storyline might be as simple as just like a sequence of photos. Um, I have a three-shot sequence of a crowd, someone in the crowd, at the ESL One Dota event from a couple years ago, and she's sitting there and she's like looks super anxious and then is going super crazy, and then the tea fight went bad and she's just like slumped over in her chair. Um, and that's is it a storyline? I don't know if it's a storyline. It's more of a sequence than a storyline. But sometimes it's little things like that. Other times it's this past Evo you had Li Joe, kind of stole the show. Um, and the storyline was massive. You had him, making his run through the bracket. You had him qualifying for top 8. You had his dad show up unexpected. You had him being interviewed on ESPN. You had him,
Mm.
on the stage going crazy. Um, and that's the kind like you can't be necessarily be ready for something for that like that. You can't come into the event like saying, "Oh, I wonder what Lij is going to do this event," because nobody saw that coming. Um, and so as you see those things start to develop, you kind of have to keep an eye on them. When you start hearing rumors about, well, Li Joe just beat this guy and Li Joe just beat that guy, you're like, okay, I need to start making sure I'm there when Li Joe's playing his matches. And that's I think that's one of the other sides of it.
So when you specifically mentioned earlier the fist bump thing, so when you see that human moment, does that factor into your storyline? How does that work?
It can. It depends. It depends on what's happening. That it might be okay. Like so and so is a new player on the team, and getting shots of him fist bumping with his other players, with his other teammates, might carry more significance than two other like veteran players fist bumping each other because they know each other. They've been playing together forever. Maybe it was a fist bump after a tough round in a crucial match. The context of the event and of the players and of the team, can affect that. And sometimes it's just a fist bump. Sometimes it's just a cool moment that you happen to be there for.
Well, is that concludes our panel here. Awesome, awesome time. I did not imagine how successful and how much learning that I would do here in just this hour alone about esports photography. Something I never would have even thought to pay attention to. And I would just spend another viewer just looking on, and then oh, there's some guy. Why is he on the stage? And and now he's getting tackled and ushered off stage. So, thank you very much for the two of you to take time out of your day to do this, but to show us what it's like, to show us what it means to be an esports photographer, and why that's important to our industry. Because without photographers, how would I even know what DreamHack looks like without a picture of DreamHack or that picture, that infamous picture of a full stadium? Somebody took that picture. That was taken by a photographer, and I have a photographer to thank for that. So thank you too for what you do. If you're watching now or a VOD in the future, please, you see those Twitter @signs. Please take a look at Rob and Troy's portfolio. Share them and like them as you see fit. They both mentioned that that's very important. And yeah,
Absolutely.
I could go on and on, but I just want to say thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's just end here with the closing comments. Troy.
Like going back to the thing, just follow, support. Also, if you know someone, if you're a viewer, not to discourage you from having photos, but just or if you're trying to be, break into the industry, be really aware of your surroundings. I have to keep reiterating that because I've gone to an event and there were people with cameras on stage, and somehow the stream got disturbed, and the players had to replay the match. So just really be aware of, if you're trying to get into this, be aware of your surroundings and what you're doing, because you could potentially make or break one of the players, runs for the money in the grand final. So just be very aware of what you're doing and have fun with it, and try not to get kicked out of any venues.
How about you, Rob? Before we close up.
I don't know. Just thank you for giving me a chance to come on here and talk about photography. It means a lot to me. I could sit here and have this conversation all night.
I can see that. The two of you, I see the passion that the two of you exude as you talk about what you love to do. So thank you all again for coming and taking the time, especially as this was a very, very fluid lead up to what we were now, as trying to figure out questions and all that sort of thing. And thank you viewers for watching and taking the time to listen to what they have to say. So at 8:07, so an hour and 7 minutes. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Night, guys.